Marc-Antoine Gavray studied philosophy and classics in Liège and Paris. His work has taken him to both sides of antiquity, focusing at times on Plato and the Sophists, and at others on the late Neoplatonists, Damascus, Philoponus, and Simplicius, with a few forays into the intervening period. His current research bears witness to this double duality, as he is preparing a translation with commentary of Plato's Hippias, as well as an edition with translation and notes of the Neoplatonic commentaries on Plato's Phaedo, in collaboration with Peter Don from Leuven. For some years now, he has also been interested in the questions raised by the concept of philosophy as a way of life. Marc-Antoine Gavray is involved in several collective research ventures. He's member of the Meteor Research Center, from which he was co-director from 2016 to 2018, a founding member and secretary of the contact group La Tradition Platonicienne de l'Antiquité, and co-organizer with Thomas Benatouille and Sylvain Delcominet of the L'Île Libre Theme. And today he will be presenting a paper with the title Philosophy as a Way of Life in Neoplatonism.
Thank you, Helder. I hope it seems to be working. So, uh, I'll try saying that. I'll start saying that this is a forehand paper written together with Simon Fortier, who is not in Lisbon today, but who follows us online, but under a nickname. So maybe there is a trick game if you want to find him. And I will say that we share the ideas. We basically agree on the content. I will say the language is his, is native English speaker, so he's better than me in English. But unfortunately for you, the accent will be mine. And well, it's time for a good nap. I would say at 4 o'clock, I will enjoy a good nap. But remember, even when Plotinus sleeps, his intellect is still active. So let's start with that. And nothing could be simpler than to paint a picture of the Neoplatonic way of life. So abundant are the sources. One need only open the biographies of Plotinus by his student Porphyry, of Proclus by his student Marinus, of Isidore by his student Damascus, of Pythagoras by Porphyry and Iamblichus, or even of Iamblichus and others by Eunapius, to find accounts of lives in line with the philosophical principles of Neoplatonism. And if Neoplatonism ever set itself up as a way of life, who better to express it than its founders and principal representatives? What image, therefore, do these lives give us? Let us take the example of Plotinus, as he lived and died at the time recorded by Porphyry in his life of Plotinus. He ran a school, wrote but never reread a line, lived in the house of the wealthy Gemina surrounded by wards from the upper nobility, shunned public baths but received daily messages at home. He kept out of politics but encouraged the Emperor Gallienus, who greatly admired him, to found Platonopolis, a mythical city of philosopher that was supposed to be governed according to Plato's laws. Finally, after retiring to Campania, he died sick and alone. All in all, an ordinary life without being entirely banal. It was that of a prominent intellectual appreciated by the social elite. Let's now turn to the life of Proclus. I won't sum up all the Neoplatonist life. He too ran a school. He was of great beauty and left a sizable fortune. He ate little and was satisfied with the bare minimum. In friendship, he was selective but faithful. He sometimes took part in political life and deliberations, giving advice and interceding on behalf of his fellow citizens and even other cities. For the most part, however, he consulted his friend Archiades, who took care of the city's affairs. He was a hard-working man, teaching 5 exegesis classes a day, writing some 700 lines, conferring with the other philosopher in the school, and giving a few more lessons in the evenings. Finally, he displayed great piety, prostrating himself several times a day before the sun and devoting his nightly vigils to the worship of the gods. On the surface, these biographies present us with two men who, however exceptional their personal qualities, lived relatively normal, not to say comfortable, lives and material lives. Under these circumstances, adopting the Neoplatonic way of life does not seem particularly difficult, but not particularly philosophical either, in the sense that it seems to boil down to following a few agreed upon rules, not to say acting like an upstanding citizen, sharing your knowledge with others, devoting oneself to one's work, feeling empathy and benevolence towards others, not worrying excessively about your material possessions. How, therefore, we might ask, does what appear more akin to good breeding than anything else become a philosophical way of life? So that's what we will try to do in the following. Hey. In reality, these biographies do not follow a chronological order, nor are they limited to recounting historical facts. They organize and stage them by adopting, sometimes explicitly, the angle of virtues, so as to illustrate that, as philosophers, Plotinus and Proclus embodied in each of their actions a way of life in line with their theory. By virtue, they do not mean a simple rule of conduct or set of contents, but an acquired ability that guides action in the right direction. These lives are not simply a catalogue of practices that can be reproduced at random to claim the title of philosopher. They tell the story of how these exceptional men acquired such dispositions and how they put them into practice throughout their lives. Far from being open-ended, the list of virtues is reduced to the four classic Platonic virtues: courage, justice, wisdom, and moderation. However, in addition to taking up these cardinal virtues, Neoplatonism has the particularity of setting them in an essential scheme by distinguishing various levels at which they might be exercised. This scale of virtues does not seem, however, that courage is inferior, does not mean, sorry, however, that courage is inferior to justice or that justice inferior to wisdom, but rather that these four fundamental virtues admit of different modes of realization. In this context, in this context, living as a Neoplatonist means mobilizing the same set of virtues in different ways and perfecting the way which one embodies them. This theory, which formed backdrop to the lives, is the result of a systematization carried out by Porphyry in the sentence 32, drawing up Plotinus Treatise 1, 2, or 19, entitled On the Virtues. Porphyry distinguishes four levels of virtues in the following ascending order. So you have the civic virtues who concern man's relationship to his body and aim, through through the moderation of patience to guarantee the quality of social life. Then the purifying virtues concern the man who gradually turns away from his body to focus on his soul and convert to its properly rational part. And then the contemplative virtues that concern the man whose soul has now purified itself its relationship to all that is inferior to it, so that it can devote itself to intellectual activity and the logit of the intelligible. And finally, the paradigmatic virtues that concern the man whose soul has lodged itself in the intellect and aspires to nothing other than to remain there. At each level, the same four virtues appears in different forms. For example, at the civic level, courage refers to the ability to resist external danger and risk. At the cathartic level, or purifying level, to rid oneself of pain and the fear of being separated from the body at death. And courage at the contemplative level means to attain an impassibility comparable to intelligible object. And finally, at the paradigmatic level to remain pure and in oneself in a perfect identity. As we can see, these levels do not refer to mere degrees in the sense of improving in the exercise of a given virtue according to a kind of continuous progress, but they form levels in their own right in the sense that, according to a principle of homonymy and analogy, also each virtue received the same name at each level, it takes on a different form, but comparable to the other of the same rank, which corresponds to the stage the soul has reached. All virtues must therefore be practiced at every level, but each time in the appropriate manner. Let us illustrate this theory with the life of Plotinus. When Porphyry reports that Plotinus administered the property of his wards and looked after their education, he is dramatizing his practice of civic virtues as the ability to relate to others without envy. When he recounts how Plotinus observed a strict vegetarian diet, refused to have his portrait drawn, or gave little time to sleep, is emphasizing his practice of virtues as detachment from the body, its heaviness and needs. And when Porphyry refers to Plotinus writing lectures, he describes him in such a state of concentration that his soul contemplates and expresses what the intellect has inscribed within it. And finally, when he mentions those rare moments, actually four, when in his presence Plotinus became one with the perfect one, the first principle, he bears witnesses to the state where man rises to the model and identifies with it. And the fact that Porphyry reports having achieved this in turn, even just once, thanks to the company of his master, indicates that Plotinus truly embodies a model and example of the Neoplatonic way of life. It is important to understand that the levels of virtue are not mutually exclusive. So I skipped the part with Proclus and the illustration of virtue in the life of Proclus. But so I start again. So it is important to understand that the levels of virtue are not mutually exclusive, as if reaching the contemplative echelon would free one from political preoccupations. At a small number of mystical ecstasies Plotinus achieved in the presence of Porphyries shows rising to the highest level of virtue does not mean settling there definitely or even permanently. It is a necessarily provisional state, the repetition of which requires constant attention and work. In other words, while acquiring the higher levels of virtues implies a progressive journey, in the sense that there is no point in wishing to possess contemplative wisdom without first exercising one's political and cathartic wisdom, attaining a higher level does not dispense from continuing to possess and exercise the lower levels of virtue. As a conclusion for this part, these Neoplatonic biographies are as much apologetic as they are edifying. Read through the prism of the virtues, what appear to be a banal story reveals a model life, not just in the sense of being exemplary, but where, in fact, observing the lives of Plotinus or Proclus, understanding and reproducing them as Porphyry did, indicates the path to follow in order to rise to a similar level, to reach the top of the ladder of virtues. And by extension, as narratives, these lives offer excellent guides to achieving the Neoplatonic way of life, that is, living day to day as virtuously as possible. While lives show what to strive for and what to imitate, other texts offer more practical advice. Indeed, the Neoplatonists produced a whole literature designed to accompany apprentices on their journey and help them cultivate successive levels of virtues, so that each level is matched by appropriate injunctions. Let's now turn to the means of putting Neoplatonic life into practice on a daily basis, starting with the political virtues. This first level, as we have seen, consists in ordering the relationship between soul and body. If at this stage the soul remained focused on bodily needs, it must learn to prevent the latter from dominating it and, on the contrary, to impose its control over them. This type of recommendation is perfectly illustrated by passages such as the following. Well, yeah, this is the following. So you don't have the complete text, but this is the beginning. So as not to be drawn into acquiring costly objects, the soul applies itself to freeing itself from softness, and so as not to cohabit with filth and material ugliness, it chooses purity. In a word, it refuses in all its way of life affectation as external to its need and opts for purity insofar as it excellently satisfies its needs. In this passage, Hierocles recommends sorting out the goods related to the body, evacuating anything that would imply excessive expense to the body, or luxury, in order to content oneself with what satisfied necessary needs. To achieve this, the soul must strive for purity in all that the body demands, that is, concentrate on what is strictly in line with its nature, to find a balance or just measure between excess and defect, ugliness and refinement, avarice and sumptuousness. It must therefore exert itself to achieve metriopatheia, the moderation or measure imposed on the patients. In a word, at the political level, the Neoplatonic way of life consists in learning to lead the life to which Aristotle already aspired with the ethical virtues in his Nicomachean Ethics. However, as Porphyry points out at the end of its sentence 32, the ultimate aim of moderating the passions, so metropatheia, is to achieve their total absence, apatheia, with the idea of rising to the rank of the catalytic of purifying virtues. That is what Porphyry invites his wife Marcella to do in the letter he addresses to her, and this is the following text. Yeah, practice yourself for the life you expect to lead by help of those very troubles which are the only opponents to your fortitude that are able to disturb and constrain you. As for plots laid against us, it is easily for those to despise them who are accustomed to disregard all that does not lie in our own power, and who deem to injustice rather recoils upon the doer than injures those who believe that the worst injury inflicted on them can cause them but little loss. In order to distance herself from the patients and to order them, Porphyry encourages Marcella to train herself to recognize that the circumstances that provoke them are totally external to her, that she has no control over them, but above all, that they do not really affect her. In the background, we find the principle of Stoic ethics, summed up by Epictetus' distinction between what depends on us and what does not depend on us. So we can say that at the second level of virtues, we must realize that what affects the body does not really affect us, that we are not really this body, but only this soul. The actions of others, therefore, and the events that happen to us do not weigh evilly on what we are in our own right, because they cannot or should not in any way affect the actions and decisions that are the province of the soul and of the soul alone. So, achieving purification and completing the second stage of the Neoplatonic way of life involves radically distancing oneself from everything to do with the body and getting rid not only of affects but also changing one's diet, suppressing desires, for external objects and abandoning sensations and opinions. The aim is to turn the soul inwards so that it avoids being polluted by all external distractions and devotes itself entirely to rational thought. Then, having passed through two stages that correspond more or less to Aristotelian and Stoic ethics, the Neoplatonist must then continue its journey towards the contemplative and paradigmatic virtues. This is where Platonism itself comes in. This is also where it becomes more difficult to find examples and short quotations, because training in contemplation, acquiring knowledge of being and the intelligibles, presupposes assimilating the founding doctrines of Platonism in order to understand how knowledge works and what it achieves. In other words, reading and commenting on Plato's dialogues, where the principles of the system are set out. The Neoplatonist project is that of a studious life in which the soul learns to reconnect with knowledge whose seeds were deep within it. So, but what is the point of all this advice and practice? The Neoplatonic project, well, and to put it in other words, where does the ladder of virtue leads actually? So the Neoplatonic project originates in Plato's Theaetetus, an attempt to flesh out its famous injunction to assimilate to God as far as possible. So the aim behind the ladder of virtues is to make oneself as godlike as possible. But which God are we talking about? The God who is absolutely first, simple, perfect, stable, at rest. So the principle of all things and the origin of the system. The one the Neoplatonist called true God. Well, but what kind of human or philosophical life would that be? So, for a matter of time, I will skip the next section and move to this one. The section I skipped was on the complexity of the notion of Neoplatonism and the variety of the high levels of virtue in different authors. So let's move to the principal issues. Is this a real and proper life? According to Hadot, the philosophical way of life is quite simply the philosopher's comportment in daily life. Such an assertion presupposes that life, at least our daily life, has a certain importance for the philosopher. Yet, when we turn to the opening words of Porphyry's Life of Plotinus, Plotinus is said to have seemed ashamed of having a body. This is of piece with Porphyry's willingness to describe the sad circumstances of his master's end. He died sick and alone. But what cared his students for that? As the Delphic oracle itself confirmed, Platonus died triumphant, finally liberated from this world. The Neoplatonists, as Porphyry's description illustrates, held that our daily life, even our entire human life, was, according to Hadot, of relatively little importance, being but briefly moments in what we might call the life of the soul. To understand the difference between our daily life and the life of the soul, it is useful to recall these three truths about what we might be called the human condition that the Neoplatonists drew from Plato's dialogues. First and foremost, they took from the first Alcibiades the notion that page 7 is before 8, that the object of the great Delphic maxim was not to do self, as the reflexive pronoun is commonly understood, but to know self as a soul. In other words, my ordinary understanding of myself, an extension of how I experience myself as an empirical reality, must be distinguished from a true philosophical understanding of myself as a soul. It is worth noting that the distinction between these two understandings of oneself as in and of itself important implications for any notion of philosophy as a way of life. We want to ask Neoplatonists such as Simplicius, for example, for whom a work of spiritual exercises such as the Manual of the Handbook of Epictetus is intended, he would reply that it is not intended for me, as I conventionally understand myself. The handbook, he argues, presupposes distinction between our conventional understanding of what constitutes a human being and, I quote, the genuine human being, which is the rational soul, using the body as an instrument, end of quote. Simplicius claims that the handbook aims to educate the latter. Its exercises are therefore not meant for someone who goes through daily life with a conventional view of him or herself. They presuppose that a person not only goes through daily life as a soul, using the body as an instrument, but also sees others in this way. This unconventional understanding of oneself and others evidently lends daily life an entirely different aspect from that to which we accustomed, to the point that one might ask whether those who held this view were indeed living a daily life that a non-philosopher might recognize as such. The second truth about the human condition to which the Neoplatonists held steadfastly is that the soul's life extends far beyond the scope of our current life. A soul, in fact, moves between various forms of life in the most direct sense of the term. According to the Phaedrus, the soul lives at times in the heavens in the company of its divine leader, and at times stuck in a cycle of terrestrial rebirths and bardos, Idean or heavenly, from which there is a possibility, or at least temporary, release. Of these two principal forms of life, celestial and terrestrial, the Neoplatonists consider the form to be superior and the soul's primary form of life. A third truth the Neoplatonists drew from the aforementioned digression of the Theaetetus. Here, the fundamental goal of the soul's existence is made plain. It must flee this world as quickly as possible by becoming like a god. The dictum finds expression time and again in the writings of the Neoplatonists. For two examples, Porphyry emphasized that, yep, page 8 now, Plotinus did everything to be delivered and escape from the bitter wave of blood drinking life here. And Proclus writes that, quote, yep, the soul's only salvation that presented by the demiurge delivered us from the cycle of generation, from the long wandering, and from the futile life in the ascent, is the ascent towards the intellective form of the soul and the flight from all that which has grown on us because of generation. In sum, given the adherence to these three truths, we might say that the Neoplatonists were operating with two conceptions of our life: our present life, which is a particular incarnation of a soul, and the soul's life, which encompasses innumerable cycles of such lives, moments of punishment and reward, and long periods of celestial existence, and according to some, a sempiternal moment after the soul's final release from the cycles of incarnation. Then, afterlife, an issue with philosophy. Fit with these two conceptions of life, philosophy must, for the Neoplatonists, take on at least two roles. Hierocles expresses the double vocation of philosophy in opening lines of his commentary on the Golden Verses. Philosophy is the purification of human life and its completion. On the one hand, its purification from the disorder of matter and the mortal body, and on the other hand, its completion, that is, the recovery of the happy life that is proper to us, restoring us to divine likeness. So philosophy, during terrestrial human life, serves to purify us from material and bodily existence. This, however, is the lesser of its roles. It also serves within the scope of the soul's life to complete bring to a close a human life by leading the soul out of human existence back to the happy life that is proper to us. That is the soul's native celestial existence. It's I'm close to the conclusion. Philosophy therefore served most fundamentally as a means of escape from our daily human lives, not all which passes for philosophy, however, had such an effect, nor philosophy alone for that matter, at least insofar as Iamblichus and those who held him in high esteem were concerned. So I will skip. But not only did Iamblichus relativize the importance of an earthly philosophical life as just one means to the soul's goal of returning to its celestial existence, but he also, it would seem, relativized the general philosophical nature of such a philosophical life. Take, for example, no, I won't take that example for a matter of time. So, but in sum, philosophy for the Neoplatonists is here depicted not as a way of daily life, but as a way of afterlife. So this sentiment was particular neither to Iamblichus nor to the tradition he inaugurated. It is one of the major leitmotifs running through all of the ancient Platonism. Plotinus seemed ashamed of having a body, for the reason spelled out by a Delphic oracle after his death. He wished not to live as a philosopher here below, but to live the soul's true life and behold more easily those many fair sights which are hard for human seekers after wisdom to see. The Platonists were convinced that what we call the philosophical life here below and what can be attained by it are pure but pale images of the philosophical life of the soul there above and its rewards. To conclude, and 1 minute. To conclude, with this conception of philosophy, we have strayed well beyond the bounds of Adler's idea that philosophy in antiquity was above all a way of living one's daily life. Given what has been discussed, even if we were to stretch what we mean by life in philosophy considerably, it is difficult to see how we can still accept Adler's thesis that Neoplatonists understood philosophy to be a way of life as anything more than a convenient generalization of limited historiographical use. Yeah. Yet, despite this, we do not ultimately find ourselves in disagreement with Adot. For our observation, echo his own personal sentiments about Neoplatonism. He related to interviewers late in life that shortly after finishing his book on Plotinus in 1963, while standing in line at bakery, he suddenly had the impression that Neoplatonism was totally unreal and even unlivable. It was an impression that he never shook and that drove him to investigate other aspects of ancient philosophy and in the end to develop his concept of philosophy as a way of life. What Neoplatonism proposed was indeed, as Edo saw, an unlivable life, at least for those of us for whom life is what we are living right now. It was a life fit perhaps only for those for whom true life is elsewhere. And I thank you.
Thank you very much for this very instructive and very exhaustive presentation of many aspects connected with philosophy as a way of life. We have now around 8 minutes for discussion, and I already see 3 hands, so I'll go by the order I saw them. Eli first, and Gianfranco, then Michael. Yeah.
Thank you for another really nice presentation. And I think it made me think about themes we've discussed in this group before. I'll try to be quick. I was thinking particularly of Annie's paper. Sort of one question is, do you think it sounds like there might be some commensurability on the way of life, art of life question because of how Neoplatonism handles internal states, but I'll try to keep it short. Sort of thinking about Annie's distinction, does the self-report of achieving internal states that is part of a sort of developmental path enough to have a way of life? Or do you need community, material conditions, or otherwise? Because I think one of the problems we're seeing here is, and there are other traditions, like Averroism or Advaita Vedanta, Pavlos talked about this. If there's an order of ascension where you achieve certain experiential states, that show you have a developed path. Is that enough? Or is there something else going on here that needs sort of further explication? And just another, you can discuss this or not, just observation for us I was thinking about is traditions that have this ascension and either have reincarnation or something that happened afterwards. Is it the sort of way of life now versus the way of life later? There's a lovely piece by David K. Tomlinson on the book on Buddhist spiritual practices about these practices around the Tibetan Book of the Dead that are also about life after. So it's not preparation for death in the sense of like how I know how I'm going to deal with that I'm going to die, but like actually preparing for the moment of death, which Neoplatonism also seems to have, right? So I don't have an easy answer, but just your more thoughts about what sort of conceptual distinctions we need to equip ourselves with if we're dealing with traditions that want you to prepare for other lives or other activities or other ascension that's in fact not this life. I mean, maybe both of you, we can go to the others, and then I would, if I don't know if you both have thoughts together, it could be sort of interesting, but.
Um,
Can we bring the question?
yeah, okay.
Thank you very much, Marc-Antoine. Really, it was a really very, very interesting communication. Well, three little questions. The first one, precisely about your reference to the mysticism, the ecstasies, for instance, that we see appearing also already in the Plodding Enneads, and about purification. That are two topics that are very extremely important for us, because they define, well, the intrusion, as Ado said, of well, something that could be considered and was considered in some Neoplatonists as religious. So I don't know if you, in your article, in your chapter, you foresee somehow to distinguish what is religious and what is philosophical in Neoplatonic way of life. The second one is, well, the second question I have, it's a curiosity I have precisely concerning my my main topic, that is conversion. I have mentioned it, and in Neoplatonic philosophy we have the individual epistrophe, that is a sort of a correspondent with to the cosmological epistrophe. My curiosity is about Neoplatonic biographies. If concerning your knowledge, you know that some of these biographies mention these two forms of conversions of epistrophe, in cosmological and biographical individual at some time. The third one, well, it's concerns the one of the few woman philosophers we have. She was Neoplatonic, as Hypatia. Hypatia was not important just for it. We have just a few, I think, of rests, but also because of religious ways of life and philosophical ways of life entered in opposition in her case. I don't know if you foresee
Excuse me, can you repeat
Hypatia.
Yeah, but your last question, I missed the point. About Hypatia. What was the question?
Yes, if you foresee in your chapter to mention
Okay.
her role as a philosopher wife and also as a philosophical way of life that entered directly in opposition with the religious way of life.
Michael, you also wanted. Really?
So 5 minutes has passed, so I have 3 minutes to.
You have around 2 minutes.
Yeah, around 2 minutes.
Yeah.
So, yeah, let's start with the maybe the simplest question, which would be the relationship between religion and philosophy. Where we one of the section I skipped was on the complexity of the Neoplatonism because you have a difference between, let's say, Plotinus and Porphyry on one side. On the other side, you have Iamblichus and his inheritors who believed in theurgy. And we will have to discuss about what is theurgy, what is the connection. So we'll do that, but I thought it was a little bit too technical to present that here. But well, it will be in the at the end of the part on the virtues. What will be to accomplish these virtues, and what is this distinction between this kind of virtues and practicing the attaining the unification with the first principle. So we'll do that. Unfortunately, we won't talk about Hypatia because for a matter of space. But if I were to talk about her, I would say that, well, she was a woman, but for a Neoplatonist, it was not an issue because her body was not an issue and herself was not an issue. She was a soul, first of all. So that's what I would say to yeah to kick off. And so 30 seconds. Way of life and art of living. Well, what it wanted to show that in a way we can say that there is a way of life, and the first part, it's strange. We decided to write first the past constraints and then the past deference, which is not the habits, but yeah, there is a way of life for Neoplatonists, for sure, and you have exercises, but they are not specific to Neoplatons. Actually, they are taken from the Aristotelian tradition, the Stoic tradition, and this is their way of life. And then there is this something more when you want to be a real Platonist and you achieve something more, and it's not pure. It's not only an art of living. It's your real way of life as a Neoplatonist, and then you figure out that it's not really a life. I mean, it's not what we could consider as a life. But it's their proper life. It's already in Plato, actually, in the Phaedo, when he says philosophy is practicing of death, and that's what they wanted to achieve. And well, practicing your death is it still living? I don't know. So, yeah, I'm sorry, but time has passed.
Okay, so thank you very much, and we'll close now the session.